This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast. On my own, with you was effortless until the others came. That's Bridget May Power with the song On My Own with You, which I thought was perfect for our subject today, because today I want to talk with you about things that you can do to understand your partner differently, to improve your communication, and to really be able to connect with each other emotionally and support each other emotionally. My hope is that by listening to this podcast today and using some of the skills and strategies we describe, you can experience a stronger, happier, more emotionally connected relationship in a way that strengthens it. On that note, I have invited my colleague, Silas, to come and speak with me today about how men and women and, people in general cope with stress in different ways, and the simple things that we can do in those moments of stress to build bridges to the center and connect with our partners instead of creating, unknowingly creating rifts in our relationships. Let's turn to our business at hand, which is a little bit of emergency medicine for relationships that might be struggling if you're not seeing things eye to eye on like what you guys both should be doing, or really like if you're needing a different kind of emotional support than you're getting from your partner right now, and it's creating conflict. If you're having those ultra fun fights about, how you're talking to each other or the way that you're relating to each other, this podcast is for you. So I'm so glad you're here. And again, my wonderful colleague, Silas, is here with us today. Silas is a marriage counselor, couples therapist, relationship coach. He also does individual therapy and life coaching here at Growing Self. So, Silas, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lisa.
Well, and the reason why I really, really wanted to talk with you specifically is for two reasons. First of all, your approach to couples counseling is through the Gottman method of marriage counseling, which we know is an evidence-based approach to couples counseling, and you are trained in levels 1 and 2. And Gottman really emphasizes communication specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. It's kind of like the cornerstone of everything we work on using the Gottman method, which I think is, so many times we have couples who come in and we're just like needing help with communication specifically, and that's what they're asking for. And Gottman, I have found is the best method to provide that.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So it's like a lot of like, okay, here's what to do and what not to do, which I love about his work. But the other reason that I really wanted to talk to you, Silas, and I hope this is okay, because you're a guy, right? And yep. One of the things that I've learned over the years, and I think is such a reality, is that men and women can communicate differently, but also I think manage stress in very different ways. And there are always outliers in every relationship. Like I think in my marriage personally, like I tend to handle stress in the more stereotypical masculine way in some ways. And my husband is like, I need to talk, so it's like not always, but for generally speaking, there can be differences. And so I wanted to get the guy perspective on a few things. So I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question. A lot of couples and individuals are struggling with a lot of these issues around communication and stress.
What we know is that when you're going through something major and you feel like you cannot connect with your partner emotionally, you can't go to them for support, they're not being responsive to you, it is wounding in a huge way. And I think that these communication differences can be a big part of that. So I wanted to offer something to help couples.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, stress, I think oftentimes is like almost a testing of relationship quality and understanding of each other. the part of managing that stress is understanding your partner's patterns around stress and anxiety, and kind of working around those things, and knowing each other's needs, and when it's put under the test and one or both partners fails, that can be pretty impactful, like you were saying, and almost traumatic in a way.
Yeah. It creates a relational trauma in some ways. And so let's just kind of jump in here. I mean, you started talking about how people handle stress differently, and how, like, just even step one, like understanding what those differences are, can be the first step of connecting with your partner during those moments. But let's just talk about that for a second. I mean, like, if there's a spectrum of like how people cope in different ways, what kinds of things do you see as being like different flavors of coping?
Yeah, I think the most, there's like almost like two types I see most commonly. It's those people who externalize their stress and those who internalize their stress. And I think oftentimes those who internalize their stress, they self-isolate, they kind of put their head down, they become just quieter in general, because, they're filtering out a lot of thoughts that they're having, that are going through their mind from all the stress and the anxiety that causes. And their tendency is to shut down and almost, kind of duck and cover until the stress and the anxiety passes.
Compulsively play Fortnite.
Yes.
Okay.
Or just find any distraction. It's funny you say that, because I think that's a very real thing.
Yeah.
That escaping into another reality is a very tempting thing for those who internalize stress. And you're kind of seeing the value in one way of video games coming through for that. That is because it's so much safer and calmer, and it takes away a lot of kind of the cognitive thought, and it focuses it into a game that's away from reality, so we can get away from it. Because a lot of times people just need a break from thinking about these things.
I know.
It's such a cognitive load that starts to feel heavier and heavier.
Definitely. Well, and I think, I mean, just so that strategy one is like, I'm just going to not do this for all. But I mean, I could see how that makes so much sense, because it's like, I mean, this digital conveyor belt of alarming information. It's like there's a new horrible thing every day, pretty much. And just to have like so much access to what is happening in the world and what could be happening, and also what is happening. I mean, let's not minimize this for people. I mean, particularly with like economic concerns and people losing their jobs, losing their savings. And I mean, again, I'm going to be all gendery here, but like, would you say that in some ways that kind of reality can impact men to even a greater degree than women sometimes, because they may feel, and again, we're talking about traditional, hetero relationships, but may feel like this obligation to provide for their families, to like sometimes be that financial supporter. Is that?
Yeah, if I had to generalize, I think that of the two, externalizing versus internalizing, men are far more likely to internalize their stress, partly because of society. Like, you have to look at male masculinity and you could say toxic male masculinity and kind of the examples both in culture and through family structures that you see how men, they just hold on to the stress and they just internalize it, and they just try to problem solve their way through it, and it's harder for them to ask for help and seek help in these times.
But like in trying to problem solve when there is not actually a solution, like in cases like this, like that doesn't just a sense of helplessness. And you bring up such a good point that in a lot of ways, there has not been a lot of space for men in our culture to almost like have permission to not be okay, or to say, I'm scared and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, and it becomes overwhelming and overloading, which is where we kind of turn into those internalizing behaviors of the video games, or isolating just to get away from it, and almost taking like a fatalistic approach to things, where they just assume it's going to be all bad, and just kind of work accordingly.
Yeah.
which I think is detrimental to men's mental health.
In what way? Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So when you're internalizing all that emotion stuff, like it like stress demands to be felt in a lot of ways. And we can
Stress
also,
demands to be felt. We're going to put that on the list of sayings to cross stitch on a pillow for our office. You haven't worked with Growing Self all that long, Silas, so you don't know this, but we have a running list of like very cute, pithy things to cross stitch on pillows. Stress demands to be felt is now officially on that list. I'm writing it down right now.
yeah, and I'm borrowing that a little bit from another one. It's pain demands to be felt.
Okay.
And when this appears for men is that like at some point that stress like has to be released, and generally what happens is they hold on to it, and then it all explodes out at once, and then there's like a full like breakdown. It's like, when you're out in the yard with a garden hose and you put your and you're just like letting it run, and the flow is very slow and kind of detrimental. Well, because if you put your thumb over it, then the pressure builds up and it builds and it builds and it builds, and then you let go, and then it's just like this whoosh of water that is destructive, and it kind of is very harmful to relationships around the men, who are going through it, and it's destructive to their relationships.
Like what? And what are we talking about here, Silas? Like what does that actually look like in somebody's house if a guy has been maybe internally experiencing a lot of this emotional stress and pressure without maybe giving any outward appearance of it? They're sort of like, sitting there. But then, you use big words like explode, like what? Throwing a chair through the window? Like,
it blows. The only emotion that's left to men at that point to express it is anger.
Wow.
Societally, the only emotion that men have told they're allowed to feel, that internalized stress just explodes into anger, which can certainly be violent, or just a lot of yelling, or it could even go the other way into just like severe depression.
Anger
almost.
Turned inwards.
And kind of like self-deprecation and negative self-thoughts, which just is kind of indicative of just like overall men's mental health being pretty poor, compared to other demographics.
Yeah. And this is just making me think, and not to be like super dark, but about suicide. That men are actually more vulnerable to taking their own lives.
Yeah, it's like men between like 30 to 50, I think, is one of the highest suicide risks out there.
Wow.
And so certainly when we're in a time when we are, facing the immediacy of like health issues, of physical health issues, but then the long-term consequences of the economic consequences, the potential relational consequences, you're going to see a lot of detrimental mental health issues for a lot of demographics, potentially 10 years down the line when we're feeling the effects of this.
Yeah. Well, and also, very, very regrettable things happening in a relationship that, in my experience, it's almost like there are these dark, malignant seeds that get planted, just as a marriage counselor, like I commonly have people, women especially, needing to talk about something that happened like 3 years ago, but that was so almost mortally wounding to their relationship. It is not done. Like, you weren't there for me when I went into labor, like my mother died and you went to do something else instead of be with me. Like those kinds of lapses, or it almost feels like emotional abandonment. Like those are so hurtful. But you're also bringing up such a great topic, which is like also this potential for this emotional or even physical violence to come out, which is like destructive on a whole different level.
Yeah, it's a tough situation, and to kind of carry on your point of, I know we're painting with broad strokes here, but like women, I think, on average are more likely to be externalizers in terms of their own emotions. So when you have, a heterosexual couple where the man is internalizing a lot of his emotions and the woman is externalizing a lot of hers, there's a mismatch there where neither one of them are really getting what they need, and it's driving them apart in a lot of cases.
Well, define that term a little bit. I mean, so externalizing emotion. What do you mean by that?
So I think it's just more often, a willingness to talk about kind of what's going on internally. So, if you're having a lot of anxious thoughts, or you're experiencing a lot of worry for a family member, or yourself, you're more likely to kind of seek help and just talk about it in general. And it just comes out, outwardly, in a way that is inherently, it's part of that stress demands to be felt, and it's sharing that load across your support network in a lot of ways. So externalizing can be more healthy in some ways, and it can go the opposite direction too. But I think more often the case, because you're externalizing stress and worry, you're getting help and support in that ways that makes us feel better in a lot of cases.
Yeah. So it's saying really explicitly, I feel scared, I feel worried, I don't, X, Y, Z. And I could see how that could be helpful because, you have, among other things, just like a little release valve to that pressure cooker, and you can mobilize your support network. You can kind of share that. But you said too that sometimes that can have a dark side as well. What does that look like?
Yeah. So sometimes it's like, a fire hose of information where now that it's like I don't want to say oversharing, but it's like a never ending kind of like run of anxious and negative thoughts, more or less, that can overwhelm a support network. And then the support network kind of starts to shut off around that person.
I see.
So if it's done in excess, then it starts to turn people away rather than bring them toward.
I see. No, that makes sense. If it's sort of like this constant, like frenetic, blah, 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 after a while, people are going to be like, you know what? I have my own stuff too, and I need to like take a break from your hysteria. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, and I could see so clearly how, like, if you have a couple where one person has that externalizing way of coping, someone has an internal way of coping, that is a mismatch. Although, maybe this is my own need to share. I think that there is also a third way of coping, and I'm just very aware of this because I fall into this camp, which is like a action-oriented / control-y kind of way of coping.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you bring that up, because conceptually, when we think of human behavior and emotions in general, they're all adaptive, and they're causing reactions that are inherently self-protective in a way. So anxiety is often really an activating emotion, and that it puts us into behaviors that are there to lower the anxiety. But the behaviors themselves that are activated by anxiety can be different, for internalizing people, externalizing people, and managers in a lot of cases. And so, if we take that view on how our partners are reacting to things, that really what they're doing is adaptive and helpful for them. And that can help us negotiate these differences and adaptive behavior and coping mechanisms.
So that right there was just so important that all of these, like sitting in a chair, playing Fortnite, not talking to anybody, or being like, blah, I need to talk about this, I feel like freaking out, or a super like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Like all of those are people being mobilized by their own anxiety and their efforts to cope with it in their own way.
Yeah, and it's really easy if you kind of are more in one camp than the other to see the others as frustrating or annoying or
wrong, maybe.
Wrong. It's often how it comes out in at the therapy room. It's one partner like, what you're doing is not helpful and it's wrong. Could you not? Yeah. And I think just bring some attention that we all have these different strategies and stuff, and just knowing what your partner's is and what yours is can help bridge the gap in a lot of ways. If you're just willing to put yourself into the other camp for a few minutes and then return to yours, that can really smooth things.
Yeah, like even just having some empathy, some just a basic, because it's so easy to do that, isn't it? Like be
Yeah.
extremely judgmental about other people's way of doing things is like, this is not right because this isn't what I need and want, right? And so just to like reach for empathy in that moment, be like, he is feeling really overwhelmed right now, and this is his way of coping, or she is terrified, and that's why she's being a weirdo in her own little way. That kind of empathy in those moments is the first step to reconnecting.
And it really takes both partners to be taking that empathetic step, because if it's just one who's doing that, then they're going to feel like they're, kind of managing it and are kind of doing all the work. But if both partners are on the same page in terms of taking that empathetic step and removing themselves from that first gut response of judgment, that the response is not what they need, then that is what really bridges the gaps and helps couples feel more aligned, and more on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and let's go there if that's okay. And with the acknowledgement that you and I talking about this for a few minutes on a podcast is not the alpha and omega of what's going to help with this, because what we're talking about right now, like helping people understand each other and see each other's perspective and gain empathy, is what we as marriage counselors do, sometimes over months of weekly marriage counseling sessions to like help people achieve this. And now we're going to be talking about it together right now like it's easy. It's not. But if somebody's listening to this and being like, this is what we need, let's take the one scenario that a emotionally externalizing, processing kind of person is listening to this because they have been having the experience lately where their partner is shut down, shut off, disengaged. They feel like they can't talk to them, can't connect with them, or if they do, they get maybe a minimizing or dismissing response in return, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, you're freaking out, like, stop. Where can they even begin to try to change that conversation with their partner who may not have any awareness of their own emotional process, right? I mean, that in itself can take such a long time to develop that awareness of, oh yeah, I'm kind of emotionally shutting down because I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like subjectively, that's not the experience. It's, I'm just going to sit here and play my video game. Like that. I know this is a huge question, Silas, but where would you even start?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of what is coming to mind for me, especially in this particular scenario, where it's often going to be the person who's externalizing or managing emotion that way, who's going to be reaching out to the internalizer.
Yeah, like listen to this podcast.
Exactly. Like you need to hear this. Like this is going to help us. So true. I think to bridge the gap when what I tell a lot of my couples is this: just take a stance of curiosity more so than anything else, and just asking them broadly about their experience. And especially for the internalizer, just joining with them a little bit in their activity, and then slowly starting to bring up more conversations. Because a lot of internalizers are using that activity to distract from the flow of information, which conflicts a lot with the externalizers because they're just providing a flow of information.
And so I'm just imagining an externalizer and internalizer sitting together at dinner, and the externalizer picks your advice and says with humility and curiosity, I noticed you've been playing a lot of video games lately since you can't go to work anymore. And I'm wondering if there's a chance that part of this is because you might be feeling a little stressed, like as careful as you could be. What are some of the responses that they could expect in that moment from their partner?
It widely varies, honestly. It could be oftentimes the internals can be like, oh, I'm just playing video games, because they're kind of engaging more in that brushing off behavior of I'm fine, like it's gonna be fine, and they just keep telling them themselves, and then they externalize that like I'm fine. there's nothing wrong going on. There's nothing worrying. And so, you know, it's a tough question to kind of come over. And, you know, I think a lot of couples run the risk of then now they're over asking, and they're just, you know, it becomes an interrogation more so than just a curious stance.
Yeah.
And so I think it requires, you know, it's not going to be able to sit down and you know, get to the feelings in a 30-minute conversation over dinner. It's going to be just repeated, you know, noticing that, you know, your leg is shaking, you know, a lot. Like, are you feeling really anxious right now? And just like over a period of a few hours, and just like giving them the space to know that they can talk. I think that's what a lot of people is, that they do want to talk about what's coming up for them, and it's hard. And so having the knowledge that it's available, and that you are offering it first, so that you're taking the step, you're giving them the space, you know, by kind of asking over a period of time and just letting them know, you know, when you're ready to talk about it, like, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety and worry personally, and I'm wondering if you are too. Can we talk about this, you know, later, and giving them that space?
Yeah. But see, this, I think, is just so incredibly important. And what I think can mess up a lot of couples is what you're saying is, you know, go ahead and like float that little boat, just like sort of set it free and then let it go. Like, say, I wonder if you're feeling anxious too. And then somebody would be like, no, I'm fine. Like, okay. And like walk away from that. Because I think what happens in a lot of homes and relationships is like, you never talk to me about how you're feeling, and this is impossible, and you're just sitting in your room all day and I need you and your door's closed. You know, like it turns into a argument about how a couple is relating to each other. And so that right there is just like open the door and then manage your own feelings to the degree that you can just like not have to have a certain outcome of that conversation.
Yeah.
Is that like the and I do not have the extent of Gottman training that you do, but like the soft startup?
Yeah, there's soft startups, there's negotiated timeouts that I think can be relevant, but definitely using a soft startup. And that really comes from the stance of curiosity, right? Because oftentimes it's what it could come out is, why are you not stressed right now? Which is almost a criticism, and not emotionally empathetic at all.
Yeah, like what's wrong with you?
Yeah, it's like, why am I the one stressing? I feel like I'm stressing enough for both of us, and you're just sitting there calm as can be.
Yeah,
which is a very, you know, valid, frustrated feeling. But when we come at it from that feeling of frustration, it is received from the internalizer point of view as a criticism, or that there is something wrong with you, or, you know, and it raises their defenses. And at that point, you're not going to be able to have a conversation because their defenses are raised, and now you're turning away rather than turning toward.
Yeah. But it's these like little micro moments, you know, and it's like when we're sitting with a couple in a little room or on the screen, and they can't exit, you know, like you and I are keeping them in that space and not letting it turn into a fight. Like, you know, saying, Joe, when Jane said that she is feeling like she's so upset and really alone in this, it seemed like you came back with something that felt defensive or minimizing to her. And I'm wondering, you know, if you were able to set that aside for a second and check in with how you are really feeling. Like that then becomes a moment where that couple can do something differently. But that is very, very hard for couples to do on their own, because these instinctive just reactions to each other happen so quickly, and it drives people apart.
Yeah, it really is. And so one perspective that I've been telling my couples to kind of keep in mind as they're kind of navigating a very new situation with only once a week therapy is to recognize that, to externalize the problem, which is the thing that we would borrow from a more narrative theory, recognizing that all of the externalized stress and stuff that's going on, it's not about your partner. You're not angry or frustrated with your partner. You're angry and frustrated with the stress of the environment that's providing you,
Mm-hmm.
and that you and your partner are really on the same team to combat the stress together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that perspective shift helps people with these soft startups, because it's no longer about they're not doing it correctly or they're not giving me what I need. It's that we're both struggling together to handle this anxiety that's
Mm-hmm.
external to us.
Yeah.
And so it aligns couples together rather than driving them apart.
Mm-hmm.
It's removing the wedge, essentially.
That's a great stance. Wow. Yeah. So that instead of like arguing with each other about how we're connecting or not connecting, or that it becomes we're fighting a common enemy.
Yeah. Because I think
ways.
what most frequently happens for couples under stress is that they end up just missing each other.
Yeah.
Which is a powerful reframe, because when we miss our partner, we think of our partner during times when we're not stressed, when we think of them at their best, when they are attentive to us and we're laughing
together. Yeah.
And when we're under stress, we miss that version of our partner so much. So we're not angry with our partner. We're frustrated that we can't be that carefree, happy version of us together.
Mm-hmm.
And just having that in mind, that what you're seeking during these times of stress is really that connection with your partner.
Yeah.
And you're wanting that.
Mm-hmm.
And when that's the feeling that you're having, when it's I miss my partner, not I'm frustrated with my partner. I'm frustrated with the situation and I miss my partner.
Right.
So how can me and my partner, handle that stress in a way that we can insulate ourselves from the stress and have a return to those happy times?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just like so profound, like, because when people are both as individuals feeling extremely stressed. I mean, I know that when I am feeling extremely stressed, I am not my best self, Silas. I'm like, and everybody is. And so it's like in those moments, our partner is in some ways like needing us to be our best selves, being empathetic and compassionate and responsive and able to see things from their point of view and be responsive to their needs, when stress makes you extremely focused on your own needs and your own feelings. And so that is a big job, is to like almost step out of your own stress at that moment and say, okay, who do you need me to be to help you right now? Yeah,
it's one of the more difficult kind of pathways of self-realization that can come through, or in a time of stress, of having the self-empathy and the self-thought to just pull yourself out of it for a minute and think, okay, what am I really feeling right now? And what is it really about? And what's going on right now? And most couples, if they're able to do that, and sometimes it requires a therapist to help them do it too, because it's such a weird stance for us to take as human beings, to pull yourself out of a situation. But if you can, and you pull yourself out of your situation, most thing people are going to realize is that they just miss each other. And they're just stressed and they want to feel safe. And there's safety in being with the person when they're at their best, because that feels the best and it feels secure in the relationship. You feel more insulated and secure from the outside world.
Yeah. But again, like that right there, that's a totally different conversation, is to say, I need you right now. I miss you. I would think is received in a very different way than that. Would you stop already? Or what's wrong with you? Because that's where it's so easy to go. So just to shift into that understanding of what you're really feeling and what you're really needing, and being able to communicate that in a way that your partner can hear.
Right. Which I think is a very important, that you have to communicate in a partner that your partner can hear, right? Because it's a very vulnerable place to go to your partner and be like, I miss you. I need your support right now. And if they don't hear it in the right way and they don't react in the right way, well, now you've got an emotional trauma, relational trauma.
Yeah. It's like a rejection. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But, and now I'm just going to say this very explicitly, like, for people, if you're out there like me, when you say, I need you to stop what you're doing and help me mop the floor, your partner might not hear, I really need you and I miss you. They might hear that you need to be doing these tasks. So to just like, even if it what you're saying is like through the actions, you are expressing need. I need your help. I need you to help me feel safe. It would be better for your relationship if you actually said that part and not make it about the mopping.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Which brings up another kind of thought to my mind when we think about people's love languages, and there's acts of service, physical touch, and all of those. It's important to know your partner's best way of showing love and affection, but also the way that they receive it. And if you have a working knowledge of both, because they're often different, that way when your partner asks, can you help me mop the floor? And if you know that your partner's, one of their love languages is acts of service, then that can be something that can help you key into it and be like, oh, what she's really asking for is that love connection and that support that she needs. Yeah. And so that can help to bridge the gap too. So it's not all on the person who initiates and is asking for the support.
Such an awesome reminder. Now, if we were to look at this the other way, empathetically and, entering in the mindset of someone who maybe copes with stress by distancing themselves or distracting themselves. Could you talk a little bit about what that experience might be like for someone who is attempting to take care of themselves in the way they know how, and they have their partner, what maybe feels like to them, badgering them or trying to get them to talk about things or do things that make them feel worse instead of better, and what they might do in those moments to be communicating their needs in a hopefully healthy way to their partner without it turning into an explosive, the chair going through the dining room window. What do you do?
Great question. I'm going to think about it for a minute.
Yeah. It's a hard one. And again, and what we really, again, need to be highlighting is that Silas and I are talking about this stuff like it's easy. It is not. When we work with people in couples counseling, it is over usually many weeks, if not months, of introducing these ideas, talking about how to do it, practicing it in the room. And now everybody's have to doing it like super crash course all of a sudden. And it isn't easy. So just with that in mind.
Yeah. And so I think with that in mind, for the person who is internalizing a lot of their emotions and a lot of their stress, to kind of recognize why they do that first and foremost, because when we internalize our emotions, one of the side effects that I think is why a lot of people do it is that you look like you're calm and composed and you're able to kind of handle it. And so what can be really important and really validating for a partner who's coming to you with like a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress is to just reflect back to them like, yeah, I hear that you're saying that and I'm feeling that too. And that's part of the reason why I'm escaping it a little bit. Right? Because it shows one that your partner's not alone, that you're feeling it too. You're just expressing it differently and that you're doing what you can to manage it. Because they can often feel like they are like crazy or just kind of it's like flying off the handle because the internalizers are sitting there and looking more or less fine and stress-free. And I think if the internalizing partner can just take a minute to just kind of respond honestly with the feel like, yeah, I'm feeling like really stressed and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I hear that you are too, I'm kind of doing this activity to kind of escape for a little bit. Do you want to join me or something like that? Because then it becomes a shared activity and the partner is no longer feeling like they're crazy and that they're not alone. And so now it turns from a you into a we. We're feeling this. We're experiencing this. This is how we're handling it.
Yeah. And I love that suggestion right there. Like, let me take you into my world and show you how I get some distance from some of these feelings and do things that are maybe kind of fun and distracting and having that invitation to do something together. Although I have to tell you, my husband and son play Fortnite routinely, as do all their friends. And it really stresses me out. Like if I'm in a situation where people are even like digitally shooting at me. So I don't love that. But Fortnite, you can like have all these little different costumes and like backpacks with iguanas in them and stuff and like dances. And it's kind of cute. Like, you might enjoy it. Just saying.
I dabble. I get a little frustrated because I'm just terrible at those kinds of games in general. I don't know.
Me too. Is, but I know.
My idea is and it's a multiplayer game. I just want to play a single player game in my world a little bit,
Totally. I like Candy Crush is really as stressful as I want to get. But anyway, but just like to have the opportunity to join, with something your partner's doing.
For your example, it might be not necessarily you are actively engaging, but you're sitting next to you.
I sit there and I watch.
And you're with them and you're present a little bit.
Yeah.
And physical touch can be helpful too, depending on the languages of just that reassuring physical presence.
Yeah.
And that feeling of togetherness. A lot of times battling is not feeling alone.
And that's so nice too, just like to find ways of being together in that and to have that understanding and respect for the very legitimate purpose it is serving and to join in that. And also, that perhaps in there is this idea of reciprocity. Like, I understand that you need to like turn all this off. And so let me make some popcorn and I'm going to come in here and spectate while you run around and do your thing digitally. But like maybe after this, we could go on a walk and I could just share. And I just need you to like nod your head every once in a while and say, and be like, oh, really? And you don't have to do anything else except I'm just going to talk. Okay.
It's a very important second step. Thank you for bringing it up because it's one we have to make sure both partners are getting what they need.
Yeah.
And both need to be to some degree accommodating for that.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where the magic happens is that reciprocity and making sure that everyone's needs are being covered in that.
Yeah. And on that note, like as I shared that little thought a minute ago, I did not have a conscious thought in the moment that I did until after, which is that what I have learned over the years, partially as a marriage counselor, but also partially as somebody who has been married for a long time, is that I have found it to be really helpful for my husband and I, if I do need to talk about things, if I say out loud before I start talking, I don't need you to do anything. There is no problem to be solved. I am not asking for advice or help. I just want to tell you how I am feeling. And no response is required because I think that my husband, like many, very caring, loving men do, that he hears, oh, Lisa needs me. And so he wants to like do something to help me. And that many times, even though the intentions are so good and pure, what that can do to an emotional connection is almost shut it down in some ways. Like if I say, I'm so worried about XYZ, and my husband says, well, you know what we should do. It's like the emotional part of that conversation has just stopped. And it took us probably like most of the 90s to figure that out. But we finally did. And now it's better.
Yeah, I that is such a little story that I think is so indicative of like so many communication strategy couples. I find that when we're doing like conflict management or something like that, one thing that I have to remind them is, your job now is, especially the one who's listening, your job is to listen. Don't be crafting a response yet.
Right.
Because I think, in that story, what I'm hearing from is as you're like sharing your husband all your emotions and feelings, he's problem solving. He's not listening to you anymore. He's like, okay, how can I fix this? Which is not, you learn to communicate. That's not what you needed right then. You just needed someone to hear you so you didn't feel alone in having those emotions. So that's a tip I often give to my couples is, we need to break down our communication because there's an intermediary step before you craft your response. It's so important that we often miss, which is listening and really hearing your partner.
Yeah. And showing them that you hear them, like to say something that communicates the fact that you heard them and that what they're saying makes sense.
Yeah, using those reflective listening skills, are you looking at them? Are you paying attention to them? How do we convey with our body that we're listening?
Yeah.
Turning towards rather than away.
Yeah. This is such a great conversation. Silas, you've been so generous in really just kind of like breaking all this stuff down and sharing a lot of very specific things that couples can do differently to get different responses from each other. And so we know from our work, and also because all of these ideas are based on evidence-based forms of couples counseling that have tons of research behind them. So this is the stuff that works. And it can be very difficult to implement these things on your own because of the reactiveness or like the big feelings that immediately come up and people having reactions to each other's reactions. What would be your advice, Silas, for let's see, put this into a coherent question. So somebody listening to this could there's a lot of takeaways and to-dos that they could apply on their own. What would you look for as an indication that a couple may need the support of someone like you to sit with them and be talking about what's happening and sort of serving as a moderator and as a coach through those moments? Like what would be the difference between a couple who could just like take this and run versus somebody who might need more support?
That's an interesting question I haven't really necessarily thought of before, but I think what's coming to mind is ironically, but statements. If you're having a conversation with your partner and they share something and you're like, yeah, that's true, but if there's a lot of those going on, that tells me a number of things. One, that there's not actually like that true listening and validating of emotions going on. And that, both partners are reflexively developing responses and defenses to what someone is saying. And so for those couples, they need someone like a third party, like a therapist or a counselor or a coach to point that out and may force them to rewind a little bit and try again. And so those are kind of the two main indicators for me of when a couple just needs a little bit more support. In terms of someone just, rewinding them a little bit, because they'll get it right the second time. You just have to point it out. And then they can start practicing that a little more.
Silas will make you listen to each other, is what I'm hearing.
I apologize to my couple sometimes because, I know this is really annoying, but it's really important when I step in here.
Yeah,
make you rewind, and I'm going to make you say it again. I'm going to give you the words, but you're and then we do it, and then it's the next session. We did so much better this week, and I'm like, awesome, love it. We're going to try again, and I'll butt in less this time.
No, that's so awesome. But I think that it's so instinctive to have those old ways of responding and to really have somebody actively stepping in and being like, I'm going to ask you to do that differently. That can be so helpful. And I'll also, in addition to exactly what you said, if there's you can tell that communication is just bouncing off and not really being received. I think what is also true is that there are some dynamics that start happening in a couple, particularly around that pursue withdraw dynamic, which is really what we've been talking about today. One partner wanting to connect, the other partner sort of pulling back and avoiding. And those can become very entrenched. A lot of couples struggled with that prior to the world falling apart, and that even under non-stressful circumstances, it can be very, very difficult to change that systemic way of relating. And so I would also share that if you are listening to this and try to use some of these suggestions, and even though you are being very consistent and deliberate, and by that, I mean not trying it once, because we see that all the time in couples counseling. People try something once, be like, well, it didn't work. It's no, try it for over and over and over again. because that will help your partner begin to respond differently to you potentially. But if there is just like this very entrenched way of responding to you, that it's like, even though you're doing something differently, your partner is still responding to you in the way that they always have, that is a good indication that you might need to put this in front of somebody like Silas to be able to just call it and like help your partner shift, because there can be interesting things that happen like on the inside of people, the relational dynamics, like, the stories that we tell ourselves about who our partner is. Those can be at play sometimes. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that, have this idea that he doesn't care or she's always overreacting. And it's those core beliefs that can get in the way of the way that we respond and show up for our partner. And those are hard to change on your own. That's my takeaway anyway.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And so I think, to unpackage it a little bit, if you're feeling stuck in almost in a rut where all of your conversations go the same way, they feel the same way, and you feel like you're treading water, that's the time to go and seek help, because you need a change to happen. And over the years or months or whatever it is, if that change isn't happening, you need someone, a third party, to just help you break down those conversations and find exit paths, different exits, so that you're interrupting the flow. And so they start to feel different, and they'll start to feel more productive over time with good work.
Yeah. Those are great ideas. Well, this has been wonderful. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll be back in touch again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
On my own with you was easy. You had love to give, and I wanted it free outside of it.